Hi and welcome everybody to today's presentation on the business planning framework for the Sunshine Coast Health Service. I'll be presenting the local application of the business planning framework in this session. And I understand that we are all in this together. We're part of the one team and we're all under a lot of pressures, and they're all different pressures, and I certainly don't understand yours and you probably wouldn't understand mine. But this is an important issue to get right. So let's get stuck into this presentation, and thank you for joining in. Just remember, our team will do what we can to support you through this process and end up with a service profile and the documents that we need to progress through the year. So the business planning framework is a business process, and it's clearly defined within the BPF manual, so I won't be reading the slide definition to you there. You should all have a copy of this in your ward and department, and let me know if you don't and we will get you a copy. But being a business process, it's something that clinical managers sometimes have to get their head around how it works, so that's what we're doing today, is working through that process. Additional training that NUMs and line managers and mums are required to do includes the BPF iLearn module, and we have a training guide for that. And there's a BPF introductory video that you and your staff should be seeing, and that's on the learning management system, the LMS system in the Sunshine Coast. So NUMs and mums have accountabilities under the BPF, and we'll be talking through those today. There's a great slide in the BPF manual that talks about the three principles that really underpin the whole of the BPF process. So point number one is that there's a patient focus in the BPF, and obviously we're right across that as clinicians, where our clients are at the centre of whatever we're doing, and that goes for the business part of the work as well. There's also a staff focus underpinning this whole process. So it supports nurses and midwives in planning and managing and evaluating the safety and quality of their health service, but it's all focused around the staff. The third underpinning part of this process is the organisational focus. So the needs and the requirements of the business around safety, affordability, sustainability, and continuous quality improvement. So these are all terms you're familiar with, and they're all wrapped up in this BPF process. Rightio, on this next slide, we see the classic triangle circulatory process here of the BPF. There's 1, 2, 3. It's talking about the demand, the resource allocation, and the evaluation of the BPF. Now, demand is a general term that's used to talk about capturing the work that is required to be done. So we convert that demand through various systems into hours of time or full-time equivalents. So the resource allocation then is a process where we take those staffing hours and apply them to a roster pattern and convert it to shifts, so that we then have supply and demand. So the resource allocation is the supply part of the equation. And then that's where the whole scale thing of the BPF comes in. So we're weighing the demand and the supply, and that's kind of the imagery that's used throughout the process. So obviously then, once you know that balancing scale thing, you need to evaluate to see, is that working? Have we got the right supply for the demand that we're experiencing? And that's an important part of the evaluation that we're going to just touch on as we go through today. So we've already alluded to the case that there's mandatory training for nurses and midwives, and just going to talk a little bit about the background to the whole BPF process. So there's an agreement between the Department of Health, and I'm going to refer to the Department of Health and the DOH in the slides, so that's just a heads up for that abbreviation. So there's an agreement between the Department of Health and the Queensland Nurses and Midwives Union underpinning the whole of the business planning framework. And when this was written back in 1999 through 2001 first publication, that university knowledge was used in helping to write that, and it became the published standard. It's also gone on to become established via legislation, industrial awards, and enterprise bargaining agreements. So there's really substantial process behind this business planning framework. It's now also established in the Hospital and Health Boards Act 2011, and there's also nursing and midwifery workload standards written to support this whole framework. So it's quite a substantial and important part of the business that we need to be aware of. And the mandatory training for nurses supports that they understand the background of this and how we apply that. This next slide just highlights some of the key information for awareness for the nurse unit manager, nursing midwifery manager. You are the key driver of this annual review of the process. You need to understand the forces that constrain your workforce and the business that you're running, and that the service profile is one of your key accountabilities and ways of documenting what your service is about. There is a procedure that governs this process too, and it's available on our BPF website. It's the BPF implementation procedure for the Sunshine Coast. So it's a local procedure and you need to be aware of that, and there's a link in the slide. So there's a tiny bit of technical detail and terminology I want to talk about you with now just in this slide, just so you have an understanding of the background of funding and constraints that happen in your business process. So at the ward level or your unit level, patient care can be calculated in weighted activity units, fondly known as WAUs or WOWs. Different kind of WOW to the computer. The health service annually receives activity targets from the Department of Health, and that's part of a funding package that comes to the health service. So service group leadership then apportions that activity out to various wards and departments, at least in a notional sense. So wards and departments are, in a sense, providing activity for the funding that they are receiving. So there's that kind of transaction going on, and that's important for you to be aware of. So your BPF service profile and submission is in effect a request for funding, and you're requesting money from part of the pie of the whole health service funding. And there's a fair bit of competition for that. So you're requesting funding for staffing and consumables, but the health service also has to pay for many other departments, for its utilities, for legal costs, and many, many other costs. So major things that are not included include the capital funding for buildings, that's separate, but all the rest of the funding for the health service is being divvied up. And of course, we have limitations around that, as you would be well aware. So I've already alluded to the training that is required for all nurses. I'm just going to highlight that in 3 succinct dot points now. All nurses and midwives on orientation will receive a 2-minute presentation on the business planning framework, and that's a once-only requirement. Nurses and midwives will also be required to view a 12-minute video provided by the Chief Nurse's Office. We have that loaded on our learning management system, and in the near future that will be applied to all nurses as a mandatory topic. The third layer of training that you as the NUMs and mums and line managers and directors need to undertake is the iLearn component, which you'll find links for in the end of our training here. That iLearn component covers the BPF modules, step by step in process, and is about half an hour, but it's a mandatory requirement, and we report that to the Chief Nurse's Office quarterly now. So there's a degree of involvement of nurses in the BPF too that you need to be fully aware of and engage with. Each year, your nurses should be involved in a SWOT analysis at the ward level, where they understand problems and issues that may be raised in a business sense, where you can then make strategies and goals to alleviate problems at the ward level. So you need to make a copy of the service profile available to your ward staff, and that's why we laminate and make a hard copy of this to go to your ward. It's to be available with the low priority activity list in the ward environment where nurses can access that, and of course it will be available electronically as well. But staff are certainly encouraged to feedback on that service profile and the SWOT at team meetings. You may have butcher's paper on the wall where you're doing the SWOT, but staff get engaged and involved in that. And you'll have question and answers at meetings and various ways that you may want to present that. So let's just focus for a moment on the specific tasks that are required working through the service profile. Each year, you are to take a look at your service demand and activity, and a lot of that is documented in your service profile in the forms of tables and charts. You're to look at the SWOT, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats review that you take your staff through. You have a look at your quality activities and how things are going and things that may be highlighted as a need to improve. You'll need to develop or redevelop and republish your low priority activity list as part of the service profile. Now remember, don't fix what isn't broken. If your service profile covers an issue from last year, copy and paste will carry that forward. You don't have to review what isn't broken. But you need to maintain in section 4 of your service profile a planned actions and strategies list with targets and assignment to people of who's going to look at what and what can be reviewed and improved. You'll need to make reference in your service profile to any workload forms and issues that have come up throughout the year. And then you'll need to feed all of that, the outcome of that, into a budget planning session with your business as to how you're going to staff to provide the FTE and backfill to make your unit work. So just some practical tips now on working with your service profile and the template that we provide for you. So Nursing Informatics copies and pastes last year's template into this year's environment, where we update centrally issues that have changed for the health service. This year we have quite clearly identified fields within brackets. So we have yellow fields with brackets around them where you can make updates and edits. The rest of it is generally fixed and provided as central information. So you need to contact us if something is locked that you need to be able to change, and we've missed that. So we will insert health service-wide updates. We will insert centralised reports like your DRG tables, your quality reports, qualification reports, mandatory training reports, etc. So we will insert those for you. Your task then will be to go to the action list and analyse and make actions in section 4 around those topics. So just now talking about a little bit more depth in the service profile. When you look at your ward and department and you think about the activity that you do, that's largely driven by patient types and specialties that you service in your unit. The DRGs, the diagnostic related groups, are summary items of particular types of diagnosis that you deal with, and those complexities need to be compared year to year to see what changes have occurred. Something else that affects your service fairly significantly is what CSCF level you are sitting at. That's the Clinical Services Capability Framework. There's a link here to a document on QEPS that explains that if you're not familiar with that. Obviously a level 5 CSCF is much more complex and heavy than a level 3, and you'll have different types of workloads associated with that. Also, the number of beds that you have funded and approved in your service is quite significant. Into this mix, you'll need to consider the hours per patient day range, the nursing hours per patient day that you need to provide, which is a multiplier that we use in the calculation sheets. And we're going to move on in the next slide to have a look at how that HPPD is calculated, just at a basic sense. And also bear in mind that our health service is judged and compared as regards the performance. Sorry, repeat that. So just also bear in mind that our health service is compared on a performance level with other similar hospitals within Queensland, and we are rated as to how we're performing, and that affects our cost structure. Okay, this slide, I promise you, is the only mathematical formula in the presentation. When we look at either the hours per patient day, the hours per occasion of service, or hours per unit of activity, the formula is generally quite similar. So the average HPPD, for instance, equals the total hours on top divided by the total number of activity. In this case, we're looking at the total number of occupied beds. So look down to the next working in the slide. It is 1,066 hours for the week over 224 bed days for the week, and that's worked out by 7 days multiplied by 32 beds. And that calculation will come down to 4.75 hours per patient day. So that's the formula how we derive an HPP something type of calculation. That calculation then will be used in the tool to work out your overall hours for your service. So now that we've derived the hours per patient day or its likeness, we apply that and we can work out how many hours we will be given over the week and have available to us. We then pop that into a roster pattern or a roster profile and spread that across the demand that we have. So some days may be peaking and some days slightly less, but we spread that into a roster profile. With that roster profile, we may have daily, as I've mentioned, variations or even seasonal variations where winter may be heavier than summer. So we'll stage that and have more staff on through winter and more beds open and less through summer, for instance. That may be particularly important to you, and it's a cost-saving measure. So the BPF is a continuous and dynamic cycle where we're planning and implementing and reviewing. So all of this can be fluid and we're assessing it as we go. So here on the slide now we see a picture of a demonstration roster profile template that we use in this health service. It obviously demonstrates that the service is a 24/7, 365 day a year time frame. It's broken down into day, evening and night. The shifts are there and the skill mix is apparent then through the level of RNs, ENs, AINs rostered across those shifts. So this is an important tool to demonstrate that you've applied your staff effectively, and perhaps you're also applied the meeting of ratios in certain hospital settings. This next slide shows a picture of a standard roster profile template that we have here in the health service in use at the moment. The top section is an input portion where the hours per patient day, the bed numbers, etc. are popped in and the days of the year, and that then provides us with an overall number of hours per week that we can roster. The middle section is where we spread those hours across the shifts and the days to meet the demand across the various levels there. The skill mix is incorporated into this because we have RN, EN, AIN spread, and we can see that we have the appropriate levels of cover. Ratios compliance is also demonstrated by this template in wards where ratios are relevant. When we flip that roster profile over in our setting here, we have a budget sheet on the back of that document. This section identifies your previous establishment that you came into the year with. It then identifies the productive hours that you are allowed to utilise this coming budget year. And it also shows items like mandatory training and backfill. And at the bottom, we will see very clearly the annual leave component that you have available for you to use. The next several slides in the presentation just break down and identify the detail around timelines required under the BPF. Obviously, there's a fair bit of work to get done through the year, and we have targets to meet that engage with finance to supply the budget. So this timeline chart is very clearly called out in the BPF procedure. So take some time to look at that procedure and look through those timelines. But I particularly want to call out to you the fact that we're now going to put a little checklist chart in with your service profile to help you monitor that you're meeting deadlines and timelines where things need to be completed. So we all understand what the delays will mean. The budget provision will be late, and we won't have targets to monitor against if we don't get our bit done on time. I just want to call out to you now the location where we put the service profile drafts for you to work on. They're immediately available. They're under the G Managers Reporting drive, and there's a link here in the slides to show you where that location is. In that location, we'll also pop a folder with this presentation and other support guides that you can use for finding the training links, etc. You need to be fully aware that this location is shared between yourselves and Nursing Informatics. We will occasionally access your file and update charts and reports in there. At other times you will go in and update the fields that you need to change. Please do not remove this file to a different location, as we will be out of synchronization, and that will cause a lot of problems in catching up later. Once we complete those final copies and they're approved by your business, we then move them over to G Managers in the history location, where we save that for our annual tracking purposes. So this next slide is just a snapshot picture of what the BPF dashboard looks like. It's moved recently. It's available now through the Health Service Reporting portal, and there's a special training session that we can do with you if you need help on running that report, and there is a guide that we can provide for you. But when you get this report, you filter down to your unit and you see your fortnightly performance against the budget, and you'll particularly want to take that to your management meeting. Hi, I've invited Karen Dean, the Sunshine Coast Finance Manager, to introduce the new Ward Overview tool that's being developed. Karen, over to you to give us a run through.
Thanks, Jeff. So the Ward Overview tool is being developed at the moment to help inform the BPF process. It's the main purpose of developing the tool was to help identify opportunities to optimise the use of resources and also help deliver on the Health Services Sustainability Program. So the overview has 4 components. The first component looks at activity. So it looks at the beds being utilised as well as the occupied bed days. So you'll see your historical utilisation, and that'll be compared to what you're proposing as part of next year's BPF process. The second component of that is the hours per patient day. So this looks again at the historical hours per patient day compared to what's been proposed in the BPF, and it splits that between your direct and your indirect hours. And then the third component is the workforce profile. So that actually looks at your skill mix. It looks at what you're currently utilising and what you've utilised in the past, and then looks at what you're proposing to see if there's changes in the skills that you would like to utilise next financial year. And then the final component is the cost per hour. So that actually looks at how much it costs to run a ward per hour and compares that to what has actually been spent. Again, it may help identify some opportunities where we could optimise the use of resources.
Okay, here we have a summary of various links and items that are available to you to support you with your process. The OCNO training video is once again available through LMS. There's a link to the BPF 5th edition training here. Our local Sunshine Coast BPF QEPS page is right now in the process of being reviewed and updated to provide a central place with training and support. And there's a link to the BPF 5th edition if you want to have a look and search that electronically. Remember our team number, it's on the slide there, give us a call. And do you have any questions? Well, we have a deal for you. We're going to be providing an email out with sessions that are available for you to come and have a face-to-face Q&A time where you can swap particular issues that you're experiencing. And our email address is here in the slides. You can shoot us a note and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and all the best.